Carly Fiorina, you are now squarely in the political arena here out there in California. And another Republican has been pretty pointed in his criticism of the president's leadership on this, and that's Mitt Romney. The president has sometimes referred to Romney as a likely candidate for the presidency in 2012. This is what Romney wrote Thursday in an op-ed in the USA Today. Has it come to this again, responding to the president's comments to Matt Lauer? The president is meeting with oil spill experts. He crudely tells us so that he knows whose ass to kick, quote unquote. We have become accustomed to this Richmond-style target a scapegoat, assign blame, and go on the attack. To win health care legislation, he vilified insurance executives. To escape bankruptcy law for General Motors, he demonized senior lenders. To take the focus from the excesses of government, he castigated business meetings in Las Vegas. And to deflect responsibility for the deepening and lengthening downturn, he blamed Wall Street and George W. Bush. But what may make good politics does not make good leadership. When a crisis is upon us, America wants a leader, not a politician. Do you think that's fair?
I think there's much in that that's fair, and there is a difference, obviously, between governing and leading and running for office or campaigning. Look, BP has huge accountability here, and they need to be held to account. But the government has accountability as well. When we hear that there are 13 separate federal government agencies running around in confusion down there, when we hear that there is equipment that could be used to help clean up the Gulf sitting warehouses, when we hear that there is assistance that is being pleaded for by local officials and that assistance is not coming, all of this leads to the impression that this is not yet an effort where the president is exerting as much control as is necessary to get this thing fixed. Of course, BP has responsibility, but we also need to understand where were the government regulators? Where was MMS, despite the fact that the leader of MMS had been brought in by Ken Salazar in a move to reform the agency, according to him.
All right, this is the Mineral Management Service, which oversees these oil rigs. Congress.
Where were the regulators? This from a party who has single-handedly allowed industry and private sector to regulate themselves, who presided over an agency in MMS that was so cozy with regulators, was so cozy with the oil industry executives that they were going on trips with them, taking vacations, even sleeping with them. So, I mean, we're talking about a party that really doesn't have the right to criticize now in terms of regulation. We, under President Obama's leadership, are cleaning up that mess and cleaning up the mess of the oil spill. But this is ultimately BP's responsibility. President Obama has commanded over 5,000 vessels in the region to make sure that they are involved in the cleanup. 26,000 federal employees involved in the cleanup down there. Mobilized and authorized up to 17,500 members of the National Guard, and is on his way down to the Gulf region for the 4th time. This is an unprecedented response to an unprecedented man-made disaster.
Doris, let's put this in a kind of a larger frame here. Something struck me going back looking at President Obama's interviews over time. Back in October of 2006, he was on this program, and he said something that really any candidate can say because it becomes true when you're president. Let's play that.
Most of the time, it seems, the president has maybe 10% of his agenda set by himself and 90% of it set by circumstances.
Et voila. 90. How's he doing with the 90%, Doris?
Well, you know, it's interesting just listening to what you're saying about how much he actually has mobilized down there. 17,000 National Guard, 20,000 people. And yet the impression hasn't gotten to the country about those people being there. Reagan understood the important pictures. I think if Reagan had been doing this, he would have made sure that each time the president went down there, that we saw pictures of what these people were doing, because we only know it as a list, and we have to somehow counter the oil gushing picture, which is central in our mind. I think the other interesting thing is when you hear somebody say, well, he shouldn't be showing anger at BP. The other side has been hearing he's not showing enough anger. And I think one of the problems with that is he's not a man who does by nature. He's not TR like Theodore Roosevelt. Would have been blustering. I can just imagine what he would have been saying about the BP guy. People would have loved it. But on the other hand, he has to work with BP.
And yet, Chuck and Roger, the president is critical of the media and yet responsive to some of the demands of what's been brought up here.
Well, what's ironic, the comment to Matt Lauer. And yes, it was a response to the whole kick butt part of the question, but when he used the harsher version of the word, it was because he was responding to media criticism. Listen to his whole answer. He goes, I don't sit around with academics just because, and that was a direct response to criticism coming from columns, particularly in the Times and the Post, that have just gotten under his skin. Media criticism gets under this president's skin, and he lets it show more than any president we've seen in a long time.
He believes that the anger that people are showing is a media-generated anger. And the media really cares about his displays and his optics and his stagecraft a lot more than ordinary people do. But what really gets him crazy is statements that we just heard from Carly Fiorina. Small government Republicans now saying, where's the government? You know, Bobby Jindal screaming into a microphone, where are the booms? What's the equipment? Where are the ships? These are the same people who say get government out of our lives.
That segues, because I wanted to go back to Carly Fiorina. I mean, respond to that point, Carly, for one, but for two, because there's legitimacy to that. What is good government going forward in a crisis like this?
Good government needs to be efficient and effective. I'm not talking about small or big, but I know from the real world that when things get too big and too complicated and too expensive, as our government is now, they don't perform well. These are vast, unaccountable bureaucracies. They don't coordinate with one another, and as a result, they're not effective. And may I just say, it was Ken Salazar who put in place the secretary or the head of MMS, who just recently resigned and who came from the industry. So I think this is a question of the blame game to say this is all about Republicans saying small government. This is about efficient, effective government and efficient and effective response. And what the American people are seeing is an ineffective response.
Did that head of MMS come from? Did she work on the Hill? Or?
The head of MMS was from the House of Representatives. Liz Birnbaum came from the U.S. House of Representatives. She was an employee for many years, and then she moved from the House of Representatives to MMS. So I don't know what she's talking about, but this is a big, expensive
And she was forced to resign because of her failure to reform the department as she promised to.
In the year that she was there, there definitely was not enough reform, but she was cleaning up, in the process of cleaning up from years of a totally hands-off regulatory policy by the Bush administration.
Then why did she resign?
In which they had a scandal-ridden regulatory
the reality is that if the president made a priority of reforming MMS, he also made the decision to curtail that reform if it was incomplete, to move forward on more oil drilling, to achieve political consensus on climate change legislation. So it's a question of the choices the president made.
Arguably in a year, you weren't going to be able to clean up that regulatory mess that essentially was left industry in charge of itself, and that's why we ended up with this BP disaster. But as someone, unlike Ms. Fiorina, as someone who represents a Gulf state who is totally opposed to expanding offshore oil drilling, unlike Ms. Fiorina, who even in the face of this BP disaster would continue to allow offshore oil drilling as a solution, it is absolutely irresponsible to do that.
If I may just say,
Congressman, let's let Carly Fiorina respond. Go ahead.
If I may just say, I am not defending the performance of MMS over many years. Debbie Wasserman Schultz is absolutely correct that MMS has failed in its duties under both Republican and Democratic presidents. That's a fact. It is also true that the reason President Obama reversed his decision on shallow offshore drilling is because the people in the Gulf Coast were pleading for jobs, and we need the energy. But what I am saying is this. Do not blame someone else for the failure of government that is now sitting on this president's watch.
I want to move. Hold on one second. I want to move on to something else. Actually.